Information, knowledge, directions, positions and possibilities. Oop. And okay, so just to start off with, who am I? I'm an urban planner. I have a number of degrees in the fields of urban planning and architecture. My family is Italian, but I grew up in Sydney. I've worked extensively through the Middle East and Southeast Asia, as most Australian professionals do, given that we don't have much going on at home. From that perspective, on a much bigger picture, this gentleman recently passed away, Gough Whitlam, who was a Prime Minister in Australia, and urban policy in the early 70s in Australia was probably one of the most sophisticated urban environments in the world. And a lot of those lessons, a lot of those possibilities that were established by the government before they were sacked are still with us today on how we think about urban context, urban places, development, how cities grow. I grew up in a plan as an outcome specifically of some of the work that government was doing. They established a series of regional plans, and this plan is in the south, the southern corridor of Sydney, an expansion plan for 5 million people, and I basically grew up in one of these bubbles. It was really I was fortunate enough actually to work in early 2000s with the author of this particular plan, and even though I hated living there at the time, I then understood what all of those issues were that I was struggling with from a personal and professional basis. That knowledge that it's developed from a multidisciplinary perspective has really informed a lot of work. I've worked and been able to transition that knowledge culturally within a number of different countries, of different environments. Obviously the Anglo-Saxon sort of context, Australia, a little bit in Europe, but also Asian countries, and the resiliency of that sort of multidisciplinary thinking still applies to how cities grow within these environments. And in the Middle East, it's been a catalyst for how a lot of cities in the Middle East are shaping up and how they're looking at their futures. The space that I tend to occupy is really this environment here. These are areas of focus when you start looking at a plan for a city. Where do you get your water from? How do you generate your power? What community facilities are applied, how many of them, and what does that look like in an overall plan. And the crossover, which is a really special thing to be talking about, the integration of all of these pieces, is really the outcome of a really fantastic plan. And in the context of Dubai, what do those squiggly lines mean? They mean your transit systems, they mean the road systems, the level of service that they provide and what occurs with the urban form. They mean your natural environment and what the relationship is between the natural environment and the city. What the local culture is, and the 9% of the Dubai population, which is Emirati, and how do they see their future, as well as a broader growth dimension to the city. What's happening underground within Dubai, there's massive issues with high water tables, etc. And then the nuts and bolts of where does Dubai get water from and power. So all of these things come together to give you a plan. So all of these plans generally ask have four key directions, or I suppose you could say 4 key questions. The first one, what is the problem? The second one is, what are the solutions? The third one is, how do we resolve the problems? And then how can you, as in the client, actually make this all come together? And a really important piece is that there's never a single idea that drives an outcome. It's always multiple ideas that are embedded within a single position. So if you take a position on the structure of a city, that single position is supported or underlaid or layered up by a whole bunch of other thinking that goes into that one point. Now, in terms of the tools of the trade, a pen is extremely powerful. It can describe a structure of a city very simply. Dubai, Jeddah, Kuwait, Sydney, Sydney and Copenhagen. So 5 minutes work, and anyone that's sort of thought about structure planning would recognise any of these fairly quickly. The kids these days do things that are a little bit more sophisticated. There's a whole bunch of stuff around GIS, around computation, around parametric design, etc., which is now informing the way that we can finesse our thinking on cities. We often find, though, that initial assumptions are not that far from more sophisticated analysis. And then the expression of our directions also need to be communicated, and the power of writing objectives, etc., communicates to a much broader audience. So the outcome, as in this is Copenhagen expressed in the Five Fingers Plan, 1947, is the ultimate expression of a single position supporting a bunch of ideas, a series of development corridors supported by public transport, a series of development areas supporting the core employment and CBD area, and then open space and agricultural land sort of heading towards the centre of the city. Really simple diagram, but embodies all of that. But the start of that question is really the key question in how do you get to a diagram like that. This is an extraordinary mapping work that was done in London. Each one of these dots represents a bomb that was dropped during the Blitz on London. So this diameter here is about 25 kilometres. The post-war Abercrombie plan and the greater London city plans were all about the future of the city post the war, and what do you do with vacant land, and what does the future of the city become once they were out of those horrific circumstances. Similarly, from an environmental perspective, as a catalyst, the floods in Jeddah in 2008 were a catalyst for the city thinking about itself in a different way. And Dubai went through the same sort of process in, again, 2008, when there was a complete collapse of the city around the economy. And so what does that then mean in terms of the recovery of place? But there's another dimension that's not necessarily so direct or catastrophic or consequential. There's a time basis as well for decision making. So if you look at cities, historical cities, the Hutongs in Beijing, the individual buildings in Bastakir, which form together these amazing groupings, there's quite a difference in the way that we look at, and San Gimignano, for example, in Italy. There's a different scale and a different way that those urban settlements were structured up. And the future of those started to shift. The future of the way that we see cities started to shift really with the motor car, accessibility, and different paradigms in accessibility. So this is a plan from Damascus in the early 30s, I think. It's a French plan, one of the French city plans that were rolled out throughout the Levant and also North Africa at that time. So the core city is through here, but as you can see, there's already a lot of thinking about the accessibility paradigm, which has shifted from a much more human scale to a motor car driven condition. And Dubai, well, you've experienced it every day, and so there's another dimension to that as well. So the making of these plans, this is again a classic diagram for the 44 plans, the Abercrombie plan, the Greater London plan, which had underneath it, underpinning it or layering it up, there are a series of clear assumptions, limiting growth within the city, creating satellite cities around the major core area, identifying the road infrastructure to support that, building a green ring around the city. And those elements for the last 75 years have driven the structure of the place, of the city. And only now, given the problems that there are with provision of housing, the environmental issues around flooding, you could argue the quality of place, there's a real questioning of what this city is going to look like moving forward. So some of the unintended consequences of that fantastic work to resolve those catastrophic conditions from the war are now being recognised as being not the best urban solutions. Elephant and Castle is one of the many high-density residential developments that have now been demolished and rebuilt. And the city itself now is still structured around that one plan. But if we were to really push the agenda and say, okay, so how can those layers be reflected in a contemporary way? What does it look like? On the left is the current structure of the city, hemmed in, limited growth based on a green ring. If we really stuff around with the green ring, what do we get? Can we push it into the city? Can we get these corridors working from an environmental perspective? Can we build value in a different way? Can we think about access in a different paradigm? Again, that's a position, but it's underneath that is a whole bunch of layering of different dimensions, hence the crossover. Jeddah is a similar conversation. Jeddah, the floods that occurred in 2008 were as a consequence of uncontrolled urban development in low-lying land, which was traditionally natural water courses or natural wadis. There was a little bit of a disregard of those natural systems. In addition to that, there's a cultural dimension in Jeddah, particularly around the Hajj and the growth of unplanned settlements within that urban context. So 60 unplanned settlements which are inhabited by a range of different cultural groups. There have been a number of plans done for the city, but if you look at these, each one of these totally disregards environmental context. Hills of 400 metres to the east, there is not a single watercourse shown cutting through the urban land in all of them in order to be able to deal with that very simple fundamental piece to structure up a plan. The other piece that we've been struggling with, even though the positions are quite simple and even the layers that you have to turn on are known, is we have a really complicated bureaucratic dimension, a bureaucratic web that actually builds this city. So now we're in a position where because of the floods, there was a solution put in place that was a catalyst for other things to occur. We were able then to understand what the best directions were for the city and a possibility of linking the environmental as well as the structural pieces of the place to ultimately come up with a plan which builds in all of these elements. In addition, in Jeddah, the government has been relatively open, so we've been able to have public consultation, so we start to understand what not only the government and the investment sector is looking at, but also what the public is looking at in terms of making a plan. And the response has been the ability to create both or heading towards a regional plan and a more localised plan that does pick up on all of those layers. Dubai is a city that's actually has inherited a fantastic plan from Doxiadis in 1985. It then had another fantastic piece of work in the 90s, which organised the city, created a series of centres, did a whole bunch of stuff to really drive the city forward. And then all of a sudden, something happened. Someone got greedy, and there was an estimated population of around 9 million people if all of the projects were added together in terms of the population. The government of Dubai obviously saw what happened in 2008, and now there's a new plan afoot that has been released, I believe, at Cityscape. But there is still a sort of a conflict there on do you control growth or do you not control growth? Do you control the future of the city or do you not control the future of the city? What are those underlying elements that are fixed and what are mobile? So even though there's a clear direction, there's a number of things underneath that do cross over to give you a singular position. There's still an inherent political and political, pseudo-political dimension to the city itself, which is really, Dubai is really at the forefront of expressing and how the city sort of moves forward. And there are a number of unintended consequences. Just being here today, the cultural agenda that Dubai has, fantastic. We didn't even, we really didn't think about that when we were looking at the plan of Dubai. We knew it was there, we provided this hard infrastructure, and now there's a soft infrastructure, the possibility to have these sorts of conversations in these places that hopefully will lead to other conversations or lead to other references. The other one which is quite interesting is the health dimension. The bike path, 130 kilometres of off-road bicycle path, nowhere else in the world. That's just extraordinary. And again, something that if we had have tapped into the health piece, which we did, that's definitely not one of the solutions. So someone's taken a position and away they went. Quite amazing. So after all of that, buy one of these. This will help you to be able to clarify your positions. Embrace the complexity to stimulate the solution. There's always, at some point, all the layers will come together to get to a preferred position. Basically, don't be afraid to explore what the best solutions are, and there are a number of mechanisms that we use to be able to do that, to run through options, to evaluate options. But the simpler you express a single position, the more simply that we express that, the easier it is to understand how all the components fit together. And the final one is that there's always a reason why a conversation has started. So, however, the reason changes over time. So this particular image is from 1947. So inner Sydney, what were considered as slums, which are now the highest end residential development in inner Sydney, compared to the ideal, which was the low density suburban, which is now considered to be the worst form of urban development. So even that conversation over time does change. So that's where I'm at. It's all about layering it up, crossing over, and single positions.